Wow, Christmas is so close. We're just a few days away from celebrating the birth of Jesus. So, Merry Christmas and welcome to the final episode here in our series entitled Crash Course Christmas, right here on 30 on Thursdays, the online resource of the Root Church of Tampa Bay. Pastor David here with you, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at the strangest telling of the Christmas story that the Bible has to offer. For the last 2 weeks, if you've been tracking with us, we've kind of been in Matthew, the traditional story there, and in Luke, the familiar story there. But there's one more account in the Bible that we need to look at that tells the story of Christmas, and it comes from a rather unusual book, an interesting book unto itself, the book of Revelation. So grab your Bibles, flip over to Revelation chapter 12. It's the last book of the Bible. It was written by a man named John, as in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, a disciple of Jesus. He's been, at this moment in time, he's an old guy. He's very, very elderly. He's been put on an island in ancient times, the island of Patmos. He's like a political exile, if you will. He's been quarantined on the island of Patmos, and yet Jesus, on the Lord's Day, comes to him and gives him this revelation of how things are going to go down when Jesus returns to earth. And so he's like, write this stuff down, John. And in Revelation chapter 12, Jesus almost like hits the pause button and he goes, let's just kind of take stock. Let's just kind of remember where we've come from, everything that's happened, so that we understand what's going to happen as we go forward. And so Revelation chapter 12, I want to read 6 verses, beginning in verse 1. Listen to this imagery. It's very apocalyptic in nature. It's very symbolic. It paints pictures as much as it expresses ideas in words. So just kind of listen to this very rich language. Here we go. Chapter 12, Revelation, verse 1. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems, or 7 jewels, if you will. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Okay, this isn't exactly the Hallmark version of Christmas, right, that you and I are familiar with. I mean, we prefer postcards of Mary holding baby Jesus, not some woman crying out in the pains of childbirth, right? And no matter how crazy you get with your holiday decorating, you've never had a neighbor come knocking on your front door and like, hey, bub, I think the wind knocked your great red dragon down off the roof, so you need to go take care of that. We kind of prefer the Silent Night version of Christmas, right? We like our animals a little more docile than great red dragons, preferably like donkeys and camels and sheep, right? But here's the deal. Revelation 12 does seem to share with us a very unique, a spiritual take on the Christmas story. In fact, I think that the story in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6 that we just read actually parallels not just the Christmas story, but other stories in the Bible that have an overarching meaning that really underscores the true intent of Christmas. And so for the next few minutes, let's just look at 3 stories that really are paralleled here, that what we just read in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. The first one, of course, is the birth of Christ, the story that Luke and Matthew tell in their Gospels, right? The symmetry here is pretty simple. It means pretty obvious. You got a pregnant woman and a pregnant woman. But in Jesus' story, the pregnant woman is obviously Mary, the virgin, right? The male child who is to be born is obviously Jesus. It says that he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. Okay, when Jesus came the first time, John, the same guy who wrote this, the same guy who wrote the Gospel of John, called Jesus the Lamb of God. I mean, he's this sacrificial person who gave his life on a cross. But John, who wrote Revelation, in the book of Revelation, we're introduced to Jesus as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So when he returns, there will be no marked meekness. There will be no laying down of his life. He is coming back as the undisputed king of the jungle, baby, okay? He's coming back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, completely victorious, completely triumphant, and he will rule the nations forever. Okay, but there is a dragon. It's not some scaly creature, though. It's actually a man by the name of Herod. Herod, who's king. History calls him Herod the Great, but that's a terrible, terrible moniker. It would be like saying Hitler the Great, because Herod murdered lots of people in his own family, in his own political atmosphere, spiritual leaders around the city of Jerusalem. He could murder anybody that crossed him, or so he thought. So the story in Revelation 12 kind of parallels this, because in the story, Matthew and Luke tells us, specifically Matthew, but the old, the gospel versions, is Herod is the dragon. He wants to destroy, he wants to kill Jesus as soon as he's born. How do we know that? Because some wise men come and visit, and they say, hey, King Herod, where's the one who's been born king of the Jews? And that question would have set Herod off, because here's the deal. He's the king of the Jews, right? At least he thinks he is. I mean, he paid a lot of money to be able to wear the crown. He was never a king, not even really Jewish, but he's yet the king of the Jews. So he wants to find this baby boy who's been born the king of the Jews, so he can kill it. But he tells the wise men, hey, why don't you go find this baby boy, bring him back to me, or tell me where he is so I can go and worship him as well, and that way we can have peace and all the stuff, right? Yeah. The wise men are warned not to tell Herod that. So they go back home after they find Jesus at the house. They go back home a different way. Herod is ticked off. So he sends his soldiers, he sends a posse down to out of Jerusalem down to Bethlehem. And there in Matthew 2, we're told the story that the baby boys, 2 years of age and under, are killed by King Herod. So very bad news, very dark, grim news that taints the story of the coming of Jesus, right? So there is a very much a dragon there in the form of King Herod. Interestingly, there's this whole scene about the woman fleeing into the wilderness from Revelation 12. If you don't know this, again in Matthew, God warns Joseph that all this is going to happen. So he says, listen, get up right now. And the Bible says that Joseph got up in the middle of the night with his wife and his son, and they fled to Egypt. And it says that's, just so this was happen, so that the prophet will be proven true. And he said, out of Egypt I have called my son. And so they flee down to Egypt, where everything is taken care of. Though we have no record of it, though we don't have any details of what happens down there in Egypt, this young family, this small little family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, they are taken care of. They prosper, and at some point, the Lord comes back to Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, and says, hey, Herod's dead. It's safe to come back to Israel, so bring my son up out of Egypt and bring him back to the promised land. And that's exactly what happens. So there is the first story that this parallels, the story of the birth of Jesus. But there's another story that this telling of Revelation chapter 12 kind of mirrors, and it's actually the history of Israel in the entire Old Testament. Now relax, we're not going to cover the entire Old Testament in this video, but just really quickly, let me tell you two stories that kind of illustrate, again, Revelation 12 as God saving the day here. In case you don't know, sometimes Israel is referred to by God as a woman, like his bride or whatever, like the church is kind of. So let me break it down. The pregnant woman of Revelation 12 is Israel itself, is Israel the nation, Israel the country, Israel the people. The male child is obviously the Messiah, though in the Old Testament we're never told his name of Jesus. It's Emmanuel, God means, which means God with us. But Israel, made up of Jews, it's the Jewish nation, the nation of Hebrews, they're going to have a Messiah, and he's going to be a Hebrew himself. He's going to be a Jew himself, and that is obviously going to be Jesus. But there's also a great red dragon. In fact, there's a couple of dragons. And again, they take the form of guys, very, very powerful men. The first one is, as we're introduced to them chronologically, a guy by the name of Pharaoh. so much history, so much theology embedded in the book of Exodus. But here's the deal. In the book of Exodus, we're instantly introduced to trouble. If you read Exodus chapters 1 and 2, that the people of God, the Hebrews, have been enslaved by a new Pharaoh who's come to town, who doesn't know Joseph, okay, from the book of Genesis. And so he rises to power, he enslaves the people, but yet God's people continue to grow in number, they continue to prosper, and so Pharaoh's kind of like afraid of them. He says, we got to start killing off these male babies, and so he hires these couple of midwives from the Hebrews to do so, but they don't. They just they save the baby boys instead, and then eventually Pharaoh takes matters into his own hands, and he just begins to throw the male children born to the Hebrews thrown into the Nile. Okay, so there's that one. So slavery, there's hindrance to worship, and then there's ultimately genocide. I would call that a great red dragon trying to devour the children of Israel, but specifically one child in particular, the child who would become Messiah. You see, the dragon, Satan, the serpent of old, he knows that if he can stop the nation of Israel, if he can devour the nation of Israel, there will be no Jewish Messiah to come. If there's no Jewish Messiah to come, then there's going to be no salvation. So the sooner I can just rip apart the nation of Israel, as soon as I can destroy the Hebrews, the sooner I can rid myself of the worry of a Messiah. That's what the serpent, that's what the dragon is thinking. There's another story in the Old Testament, though. It happens much later. It's actually the book of Esther, short little book in the Bible, but we have another dragon revealed there. That dragon's name is Haman. And Haman is an Agagite. He's an Amalekite. He's a descendant of the people who really, really, really hate the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews. And so under the reign of King Ahasuerus, who's the king of the Persian Empire, King Xerxes is another name he goes by. By the way, if you're a movie buff and you like the movie 300, it's that guy, okay? So there you go. But Haman is kind of like his right-hand man. Okay, and he has this really bad encounter. He just hates this Jewish guy named Mordecai. And so because he hates this guy so much, Haman hates Mordecai so much, he just goes, you know what? I'm just going to kill every Jew in the Persian Empire. And he gets the king's blessing to do so. And so the story of Esther, if you've never read it, it's 9.5 chapters of like just keep you on the edge of your seat literature because you're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how is God going to save the day? And interestingly, God is never mentioned one time. In the entire book of Esther, he's never mentioned one time. Yet we see his fingerprints everywhere, directing people and directing events and just really laying out things to be of benefit and blessing to his people, the Jews. And so here we go. Again, God provides in the wilderness. Even in this land of exile, the land of Persia, God takes care of his people. So again, a second story that really relates quite nicely and is parallel to the story that we just read in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. But there's one more story, and this is just besides the Christmas story, the most familiar one of all. It's the story of the Garden of Eden. Now, I gotta say, not a lot of people make this connection, and I'll just give you my disclaimer. I reserve the right to be wrong about this, but I see something and would like your feedback on it. You tell me what you think, but I'll share some parallels and you tell me what you think. I see all the major players from Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, showing up in the garden. Okay, watch this. We have a pregnant woman crying out there's a pregnant woman. It's Eve, right? And she's crying. She's given birth because in pain because of the curse that God has put her under because of her own sin just a chapter earlier. Okay, we have a dragon, but again, it is in Revelation. It's the devil. Obviously, it's Satan that we're talking about here. And in Genesis chapter 3 and 4, or chapter 3 precisely, but 4 kind of he hides himself, but does some really bad things. We have the same exact enemy, Satan, the devil. He's the serpent. He's the tempter. He leads astray. He deceives. And so this woman, Eve, has not one but two baby boys. The first one is Cain. The second one is Abel. And in just a tragedy, Um, the very first family that exists on earth goes through a murder inside its own house. Cain, the older brother, kills his younger brother, Abel. Cain kills Abel out in the field, right? And so it's just heartbreaking. But God again provides provision because Cain is sent away. There's a dead body, their son. So God provides again in a wilderness of the soul. He provides another son. The son's name is Seth. You may not know that, but Adam and Eve didn't just have Cain and Abel. At the very least, they had Seth as well. And in Luke's version of the gospel of Jesus, listen to this. He goes through, kind of like Matthew, he gives a genealogy that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Luke gives a genealogy too, but it starts with Jesus and goes backwards, whereas Matthew starts in history and comes forward to Jesus. And it says, he's the son of the son of the son of the son of, says Luke. And he says, this person's the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, the son of Canaan, the son of Enos or Enoch, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. And so right here, even though there is a serpent, even though there is a dragon trying to destroy this first family, God provides, God saves. Interesting, right? Equally interesting is how the story in Revelation ends. Let's bounce back to Revelation chapter 12, read a few more verses, and then wrap up this episode. Because we have a woman who is giving birth. A baby boy is born who is going to rule the nations with an iron rod, and she is saved. He's saved, she's saved, all seems well. Let's pick up Revelation chapter 12 and start right here in verse 7 where we left off. So after these events, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Well, that's good news. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, was now thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren have been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him, watch this, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto the point of death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman who was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. That's just a very ancient way of saying 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to help the woman. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Wow. Again, we've never thought of Christmas in these terms. We've never thought of what happens on the earth today since Christmas came, the very first Christmas 2,000 years ago. So you might be thinking, David, why in the world are we going through this passage? Why are we looking at this passage during Christmas? Well, 3 quick reasons. Number 1, I don't want you to ever forget what Christmas is really about. I don't want you to ever forget what Christmas truly means. Christmas, if I can put it in military terms, is really the opening act of war that God is waging against our enemy and his enemy. Okay? We sing Silent Night at Christmas time, but it was anything but silent. Wars are not silent. God invaded the earth in the form of his son Jesus to conquer our sin, to conquer the grave, to conquer death and shame and guilt and regret. Okay, so but by all means, celebrate. I mean, eat, enjoy family, laugh. Okay, that's what Christmas is about. But just don't forget the spiritual side of Christmas. The spiritual side of Christmas means there's war being waged all around us in the spiritual realm. So just number one, I don't want you to forget what Christmas is really and ultimately about. It's Jesus coming to us to conquer our enemy. Number two, let's talk about that enemy. There's an enemy on the loose, okay? Now, this won't surprise any of you people, brothers and sisters of mine at the Root Church, because we talk about John 10:10 an awful lot. I tell you all the time, memorize this verse because there's so much just life application, just so much clarity that can be granted by understanding this verse. John 10:10, Jesus is talking, and he says, listen, there's a thief, and he has come to kill, to steal, and to destroy. Okay, so there's your great red dragon. There's your serpent. There's your devil. There's your Satan. If something is trying to destroy, if something is trying to deceive, if something is trying to kill or to steal from you, that's your enemy. So Jesus says, there is a thief. He's come to kill, to steal, and to destroy. But I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. So you got to choose right there. There is a thief who wants to kill, and then there's the good shepherd who wants to lay down his life for you and for me. There's another verse, though, about this enemy, the devil. It comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. And in the closing lines of this epistle of his, this letter of his, he gives us this warning. Peter, the Peter that followed Jesus, be sober-minded, he warns. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Now listen, he has absolutely been defeated on the cross, okay? Jesus has conquered him, but he loves doing as much damage as he can. So just remember, be sober-minded, be watchful, because there is an enemy on the loose. But thirdly, lastly, here's what Christmas means. Here's why we're looking at this story, this unique telling of the Christmas story. I want you to remember and never forget that it's God who saves. I mean, every single time. In fact, this is the most important message. The angels who declared the birth of Jesus to the shepherds, they can't save. The wise men who show up with these extravagant gifts that we talked about last week, they can't save. It's only Jesus, whose name, by the way, Yeshua, it literally means God saves. Our God saves. And so all those stories I just told you about, from Genesis in the garden, when we sinned, God still saved the day. In Pharaoh's Egypt, God saved the day. In the ancient empire of Persia with Esther, God saved the day. Not Esther, not Mordecai, it was God. And then it's not Joseph, it's not Mary. They're at the Christmas scene, at the nativity scene. No, it's not the angels, it's not the wise men, it's not the shepherds. It's Jesus, the helpless baby laying in the manger. He's going to be the hero of the story. He's always the hero of the story. You're never the hero of your own story. I love you, but that's just the truth. I'm never the hero of my story. Jesus is always the hero. If you got a hero, it's because you have Jesus. Okay, so there you go. I think that was worth kind of exploring off into Revelation chapter 12 to take a look at. So let's wrap up. I hope you enjoyed Christmas. I hope you've enjoyed this crash course series here. We're going to be taking a few weeks off so that all of us can enjoy the Christmas holiday. And we're going to be right back in 30 on Thursdays again the first couple of weeks into the new year in January. So stay tuned via social media. You can check out our website, www.theroot.church, or best case scenario, you can just come to worship with us. We are at University Mall in Tampa every Saturday night at 5 p.m. and you can learn about what we're doing in person. In the meantime, friends, I hope you have a fantastic Christmas, a Jesus-filled time, rich experiences and memories and celebrations with your family. And we'll see you right back here in the new year for our next 30 on Thursdays. Happy New Year, friends. Take care.